Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody that joined around the world. Today in our 42nd webinar, I have another guest, and you might know him, Jeremy Vyska. Jeremy is known of the Business Central Discord channel and also of his various live, what do you call it, blogs kind of things, multicasting it on YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter. He will introduce himself a little bit more later on. Thank you for being here, Jeremy. And Jeremy just suggested to have this session, I think already some while ago, when we did in around May, June, we had this series of 4 webinars presenting various AL VS Code extensions, very usable, very supportive extensions to our AL development. But of course, there's more. VS Code is this, well, call it a one-stop shop, and there are more things available than just AL-related extensions. Probably you already found some of them, but sneaking a little bit, testing our things this minutes before we started, I saw a couple of on the list of Jeremy that I didn't ever try before. So for me also, I will be learning a couple of things also. Before we start, as always, just for those who joined in newly, housekeeping rules, your mic is muted, but there is a question window, so please post your questions if you do have them in the GoToWebinar question window, and I will pick it up. My name is Luc van Vugt, and I will be your moderator today. Yes, we slowly moving into the 600 subscriber to our YouTube channel. Jeremy subscribed today, so he's not the 600 yet, but pushing it up to that number. The recording of today will probably be there this evening already. My evening, well, at the end, before the end of the day, probably you will find the recording of today's session next to all the other previous sessions. If you want to be in the know, this is a URL that links you to a page where you can subscribe to our newsletter, which we use to update you, well, irregularly, although the last 4 or 5 weeks we have been sending out 3 letters already, because we did get into a mode of getting new webinars. This season started a little bit different at the third seasons of our webinars compared to the previous one, due to my work on my book, which is finished today. I need to do a last review, but the book will probably be out even in December. What is coming up from the webinars? Well, we have quite a list already. So I decided to do one. Jeremy sent in, and then Arjan came in with a topic, and Christoph and Michael, and then Waldo and Arjan had also a topic presented on the Dutch Dynamics community event a couple of weeks ago, which not everybody could join in because of, well, COVID-related matters. But you see, we have quite a nicely packed program for the next sessions. We will have a short break around Christmas, but then every second week there is a session, and there will be I'm already working on next ones. If you do have a topic, feel free to send me a mail. Of course, if you want to be a speaker, I will be even more happy. If you want to be a speaker but don't dare to, please also contact me. We had speakers before that I, let's say, coached and helped them to get it done. It's more important to share things than it's a perfect display of whatever. Of course, it would be nice if you feel like, oh, I can do this in a great way. But if you do have a story, don't hesitate. Don't let you be held back on this. So, before I'm going to hand over to you, Jeremy, I want to thank ForNav, being our sponsor, allowing us to use this GoToWebinar channel, and being supportive to us for the third season already. Actually, it started before that, but thanks to them. So, Jeremy, I'm going to make you a presenter. Yeah, you should now be able to accept that and, well, start your story.
Sounds good. And just to clarify one little thing, I refreshed the YouTube channel a whole bunch and then claimed that 600 spot for my company, Spare Brain Ideas. So you are at 600.
Thank you, thank you. By the way, I can hear you loud and clear, and I can see your presentation. So I think everything is set for you to have the next, well, let's say 50 minutes. We'll have a QA at the end or in between. Let's see how questions roll in. So have fun.
Sure thing. Alrighty, so let's talk about not all extensions. I'm Jeremy Vyska. At this point, it's hard to call myself a developer. I am doing everything these days, speaking, writing, writing implementation guides, support, all sorts of different things. And lately, not only working on my second book, but also starting to publish things on AppSource. Some of you may have found me already via LinkedIn or Twitter. I have started to create free utilities that partners can use on AppSource, such as a licensing and monetization system. So there's some cool stuff out there. If you haven't heard of me before, that's fine. So as Luc said, there was some great Visual Studio Code AL extensions series earlier this year. There were 4 separate episodes of that. I think it was about 3 or 4 speakers each one talking about all of the great functionality that was built for Visual Studio Code that is specific to our Business Central world. And I was like, well, that is pretty cool. So I said, hey, you know, as a follow-up thing, there are still some great extensions for Visual Studio Code that are not just about what AL can do. So this isn't going to be anything big or earth-shattering for people, but it's hopefully a lot of optimizations. So if you've watched those first 4 episodes, think of this as almost a Blu-ray or DVD style thing of this is kind of deep in the bonus features menu. This isn't really the main story. But I will say that just for laughs, because I hate rules and love rules at the same time, I'm going to break a rule, and the first one that we'll look at is not on my roadmap that I was made aware of earlier today. That will be AL based. So let's look at the full list of all the extensions that we're going to be looking at today, plus that bonus one. Some of them are little quality of life things that add functionality just around how you use Visual Studio Code. Some of them are periphery things in how you can share work with different designs, different file types, and there are some additional things. Now, almost every one of these extensions I use on a fairly regular basis, and they can be found in the Visual Studio market space. I have an AL pack. You don't have to subscribe to this, much like Waldo has an extension pack, so do I. I don't watch these numbers to go, am I winning? That's not the goal. But this is a great jumping off point where each of the things that we're covering today, you can go ahead and jump right to that particular topic in the list. So if you're looking for the links to all these things, just search up the Spare-Brained AL pack in the market space, and you'll get to every extension we're talking about today. And you will notice that we do have all of the great AL extensions that have been covered in series so far. And yeah. So the first one that I want to chat about today, before I dive into our list, the secret off-topic one, someone made me aware of today in the Discord for Business Central users. There was this great little extension discussion, and someone has made a new extension, or at least it's new to me, it's apparently been around for a little while, called AL Structure Creator. And this will be going into my pack tomorrow. This allows you to create predefined folder structures and then apply them to new repos with a command. So if you're always finding yourself creating a source folder, you're always creating a logo folder, you always end up creating a permissions folder, and all those things that you have to manually do every time, this allows you to spin up templates for that. So this was off the beaten path, but one of the many reasons that I love the folks chattering away over on the Business Central Discord. They share all sorts of really cool stuff. So, to go back on track, let's talk first about some of the little ones. And we're just going to jump straight into demo. Exciting, I know. The first place that we're going to start, I don't know if anyone explicitly said this, but most of us are experts and 95% of everything, and it's not always obvious what you don't know. So a little thing to be aware of is that when you're in Visual Studio Code and you're looking at the list of extensions, when you are on extensions, they will show you what they do. And they will explain, based on what the author has written up, all of the things that have been added. If you are needing to get to the web page to find out who's the author, to be able to report issues, all those things, it's not always clear, but you can just click on the heading on the extension name, and it will open up the market space in your web browser and drop you straight to it. And this allows you to quickly create new issues if you have feature requests, or you just want to find out who to say thank you to, or for example, the little rating system, you can go ahead and rate them. That is, for many of the extension authors, the only payment they get. So, here's 30,000 people here, roughly, who did not say, thanks, man, by hitting 5 stars. So also in the extension view is in the settings, it's really helpful sometimes to know which extension has added something. And this little feature contributions is the Visual Studio Code generated list of what has been added by this extension. So for example, here are all of the commands that the AL Code Actions adds. So now I know that when I've done some of the find related commands, find related methods, that that's coming from this extension. So that can be really important to finding your way around when you're trying to figure out, oh, I need to recommend an extension to somebody. I can't remember which great toolbox it's in. Did this come from AZAL Dev Tools? It came from... yes, here it is. Shows an index tree. It was in this one. So that's a good skill to be aware of. So now let's talk about some of the little quality of life things. We have a variety of these are delightful, charming little things. For example, I like this little Visual Studio Code icons extension. It is just a small thing, but it adds nice little icons to all of the different file types in your document. So you get these little Git icons, little markdown icons. And I only found out today, and I appreciate you for doing this, Aaron, that it was Mr. Kaufman here who added in 2019 the AL file type. So appreciate that. So that's why we have a nice little AL icon for our files. So thank you for that. I like that a lot. It's a nice little quality of life thing. So small one there. All right, next one up on my list, there is a small extension I use frequently when I'm creating new extensions, and it is simply this tiny little command. All it does is you can punch in, I would like to create a GUID. That's it. I just need a random GUID. So I don't have to go to like a website or anywhere else. I'm going to copy an app.json from one project to another, and I can just do create GUID. And now on my clipboard, I've got a new GUID. That's all. Super simple little thing. It helps. Some of these quality of life things, there are options in Visual Studio Code that are similar or have been adopted since the extension was created. And our next extension, bracket pair colorizer, is one of those. This works similarly to the way that the Visual Studio Code environment does. I know we've had some interesting discussions over on the Twitter side of things talking about what it uses for different colors, but you can tweak the default color config settings here and be able to work with those. And it's just a really nice way to highlight the scope of whatever you're working in. So for example, if we are looking in a code unit, it becomes a little bit clearer that here I'm looking at begin, end, it's between these two. And it's a little hard to make out probably in the stream, but the line between these is also colored, so you can kind of see I'm in the space. Hopefully you're not writing functions that have 400 lines of code in them that you have to scroll for days to see the color on, but it might be so. So it's a nice option to have. And as you see, it can work with begin end, although that creates some interesting challenges for us too. Okay. So let's see. We also have, next up on my list, a small but silly quality of life thing. I use this often to not forget what I am doing. It is called To-Do's Tree. I believe this is in Waldo's pack also. But effectively, if we need to remember to do something here, to-do, remember to fix this. And that's all. And it adds to a tree here that in this file, I've got one to do, and I can just jump right to it, and it highlights them. That extension also supports having different to-do terms, so that way you can kind of use those over time to break them up into different severity. Maybe there is something that you want to add as a, I believe bug fix is a default one, or bug, yeah. So maybe we've come across a bug somewhere along the way and we need to remember to fix it. So there's just a nice little way to not lose track of the things that you mean to do while you're working in the code. It does mean that if you check in this file with GitHub or Azure DevOps, if you check the file into source control, you are checking in that code, but that's okay. Okay. Let's see. One that I like to use if you are finding yourself in a monstrous code unit situation. Maybe for some reason you have built a kitchen sink Swiss Army knife type code unit and you've got a monstrous list of different functions all doing different things. It can be a little bit challenging to find your way around when you're looking at a 1,000 lines of code. What sections are you kind of looking at? So I will use a system like this where I might say events is this section, and this extension called banner comments lets you turn this into this what looks here like an ugly chunk of weird ASCII text, but you'll notice in our tree map on the right-hand side, it's very clear exactly where we are in the code, which sometimes is absurd and helpful. I think one of my favorite moments on this was Steve Endo over on Twitter of I sent him some sample code and he knew exactly where to look. So it can be really helpful if you're trying to help someone out with issues and they're digging through things. So those are some of the little quality of life type extensions. And so far, I'm not seeing questions, and that's fine. Many of these are small and simple. So, okay. Well, let's see. Another thing I like to use a great deal is a little utility called Pola Code, which it helps if I can type. Pola Code is a little screenshot generator. It's designed to make very clear and good-looking screenshots for use in blogging and things like that. So it gives you some options on the side, but if we select a chunk of code, we can see that it will give us a nice kind of gradient shadow, and you can tweak all these different settings. It makes a very clean little snippet of code, and it does it based on the width of your window. So whatever width you potentially want your blog post or documentation to have, then there you go. And it's as simple as you click the button and creates a PNG file for you that you can use. So just a nice little thing to have. It cleans up a lot of the things that you get as part of being in a Visual Studio Code environment. So you can see all these little hash marks and lines, and some of the lines where we've got selection, preview, and info, things like that. By doing the Pola Code method, it makes it easier to see.
And apparently it takes into account the theme coloring.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, looks nice.
I'm a fan for testing that out. So if we switch that over to dark and we grab our Pola Code back open, again, typing is good. Yep, exactly. So if you want a nice dark mode version of it, no problem. There you go. And it does take into account indents and things like that. So you do want to select your whole chunk. There you go. Nice. Okay. And just for video compression and ease of eyeballs, I generally leave it on our light mode. Okay. That brings us to our next little quality of life one on our roadmap, which is a tiny thing called ExcelViewer. And as you can probably guess by the name, all it does is it allows us to open up Excel files and CSV files inside of Visual Studio Code, so that way we don't have to pop open externally. And I'm just opening up a folder here that's got some demo files. So for example, I just grabbed from my app source here where I've got some of my object numbering, super secret top info. This Excel file, no problem. I can just pop it right open and it handles multi-tab, and I don't have to go looking or opening it external, blah, blah, blah. It also nicely handles CSVs. So for example, we can look at it as just a regular old text file, or in the upper right-hand corner, we can say open preview and it switches it over to the Excel style. And you'll notice it supports all of the sorting and filtering that you would expect inside of Excel. So it's pretty nice. So a very nifty to have thing when you're working with integrations with partners and they send you CSVs or text files and things. Okay, this next one up on my to-do is also one that AJ got, I believe, put in my worldview, and I appreciate that quite a bit. And we're looking at the moment at some of the source code for the licensing extension I mentioned. I sometimes need to just think through the exact process of what I'm doing, and so for that, I love Draw.io. This extension just works with Draw.io files and gives you a very lightweight, easy to use Visio right inside of Visual Studio Code. No problem. It is super handy. You can just add all sorts of shapes and diagrams and whatnot, and it lets you create multiple tabs and all that sort of stuff. And since it's just a .io file, which if we wanted to, we could open it up and see it's just an little XML file under the hood. This checks nicely into repos. So if you need to leave a little bit of guidance to your next developer, because after all, the theme of the year for us in the BC world is remember that you're never the last person to look at your code, and separately, you're never going to remember exactly what you were thinking 2 years ago. So leave yourself some documentation. I mean, obviously, there are better ecosystems for a full life cycle documentation, but if you're just needing to make sure you're thinking through each of the steps, this can be great. If I recall correctly, Draw.io also has some really interesting functionality around linking this to particular objects in your code, and that you can potentially link that to some of the different components and things, but that I'm a little less familiar with. But it's a very nice to have when you're just doing a very quick mock-up type thing to think through a flow. And when you combine this with screen sharing, you don't have to leave Visual Studio Code to brainstorm with your fellow dev. So that one's a pretty good one. Okie dokie. And if anyone's wondering, I pause every so often just to make sure if there are any questions, there's an opportunity for them to get raised. So, okay.
Apparently not.
Yep. I have been told that is one of the downsides of explaining things well, is that you don't get any questions. So next up on my list, I work with a lot of public repositories, and I work with some repositories that aren't necessarily just Business Central. And even sometimes when they are Business Central, there are plenty of reasons that you could be working with Markdown. So I use two extensions, Markdown All-in-One and Markdown Previewer. And let's see here, if I bring those open, there are two different ones. I use both. The Markdown All-in-One gives you all sorts of great shortcuts when you're editing inside of Markdown, and the Preview Enhance gives you some options beyond the built-in options of Visual Studio Code's Preview. So you can see here that this is just pretty stereotypical Markdown. If I wanted to say, hello Europa, and I wanted that bold, now if I do Control Space, I get all my Markdown formatting, so I don't have to remember the exact, okay, I need this to be italic. Oh, there you go. And the built-in Visual Studio Code Markdown Preview works, sure. That works, but Markdown Preview Enhanced also gives you the ability to see it a little more true rendering to what it would be, and you can also test out some different things. For example, we can right-click and send this off to PDF files if we needed to convert this Markdown to a PDF file for documentation to send someone as an email. We can also preview what it looks like if someone is using their web browser in dark mode. Like, does this still work formatting-wise in the right way if they're looking at it? So just sort of a nice way of being able to see an enhanced view of what could be. All right. I don't know the answer to one of the questions that came in. That's a good one, which was with Draw.io, is it possible to link the nodes directly to different functions inside of objects? And I believe the answer to that is yes. I just haven't tried it out. But here, nodes can be linked with code spans. So that suggests that it is possible that in that diagram flow that we were looking at, that I would be able to link to each of the functions that does all of those steps. So that's pretty cool. I will probably need to explore that a little more myself. We're always forever learning, right?
Really true.
All right. And let's see, related to that, someone just gave me in the chat feedback too that there's a pretty interesting paste image that allows you to paste image to Markdown from the clipboard, and it looks like several people have tried to solve that one. So I'll have to go through these and see which one makes the most sense, but yeah. This one looks like it's a pretty popular one. Sometimes if you're trying to figure out what should I be using, it can be useful just to go ahead and judge it by how many people are using it. So this seems pretty cool. I like it. All right. Appreciate folks sharing in the chat things that they love as well. This next one, I don't use it as much, but I know AJ covers it in his API class as something that he'll use sometimes as well. So this is another one I appreciate him using as an example. I kept it real simple, but this REST client extension allows you to send API queries directly here from inside of Visual Studio Code, which lets you do lots of different testing and verifying that things are working the way you expect. And it is nice and simple. So this is against a Docker image, so I don't care that everyone sees. I'm just using the default Docker passwords there. It's fine. So when I send a request, this will head off and it goes and it gives me back the response, tells me how long it took. Here is the header and here is the chunk of body for that. And you can get pretty fancy with that. You can do variable style replacement. So we could have scripts that say, okay, up here we want this Docker, we're going to use this password token, and you can build substitution right into the URLs. So that way you can go ahead and say, boop, and it will use those tokens that you've configured, and that's pretty neat. This can be really helpful when you just want to verify very quickly, especially if you're building new APIs. This can be a really great way just to do real quick gets and say, okay, did the change that I make just give me the data that I needed? So if I send this request off to the demo data set for Europa here, I see the name of the customer here is Hello Europa folks. And if I bop into my timed out Docker, thank you. If I pop into my Docker and I decide to add to the API config there, I want to add the URL, which is field 103. Let's close that. And let's make sure that shows up now. And there we go. Here's our homepage pointed right to the Europa webinars. So this can be a really good way inside of Visual Studio Code to save all of your test scripts and be able to verify them in a quick way. You can do more than just get. You can do posts and all the usual HTTP calls. It's not as fully powered as Postman, but it still can be a really useful thing for when you're just trying to do some quick testing. So, all right, good. Now, these next two, I admit I tend to get the functionality of them confused a little bit because they do such similar things, but I've always had both of them installed, so I can't ever tell them apart. GitHistory and GitLens. Between these two, lots and lots of superpowers. So let's go take a look at a repo here where there's actually some code changes, because that helps. If we take a look at my extension registration code unit, the Git history adds right up here to the top right corner, this view file history, where I can see all of the individual changes that have been committed to this file. And be able to quickly jump off to things like cherry picking this commit or merging it into current branches and all the usual Git operations that you might need to do. And that's pretty cool. I like the view of this, but I will say that I more often than not will use some of the GitLens functionality, and you've probably seen bits and pieces of it. So we can see here that in this file, when I'm on a line, and it may be a little hard to see in light mode here, you'll see that off to the right here, it says that I changed it 3 weeks ago, and it also tags that line with a comment. So as we click through the different functional areas, it will tell exactly which commit each of those lines came from. That can be moused over, and you can see the exact timestamp and who did it and all the details behind it, as well as do more actions right from here, such as opening up that file, opening it up. In my case, I'm on Azure DevOps for this repo, so I can open this file or even that commit from Azure DevOps. So that's all nice and pretty good. But GitLens also adds some things here to the source control panel. And not only could I also see the file history here, being able to quickly see and also jump into comparison mode. Okay, here's this commit, and that was the only line that was changed as part of that commit. Okay, easy enough. But I can also see for this whole project what were the different commits in the life cycle of this extension and which objects were involved. So I can say, okay, you know, I was out of the office for a week last week. There were 3 commits to one of our clients' projects because they were trying to solve a problem. Let me go through real quick and just see what was changed in each of those files. So Yep. And if anyone's wondering, this is a public repo, spare brain licensing, so I'm not giving away state secrets or anything. The other nice thing about the GitLens is that it also shows the repositories that you're working with. It will show you that, for example, I'm connected up to the Azure DevOps environment, and on the remote side, there is currently just the main branch at the moment. I've retired all of the other ones. And in my local side, I have the following branches here. So it's very easy to do branch management as well as cherry picking and things like that right from the UI here. So it can be very, very helpful. Like if I needed to create a new branch from this, create a pull request right off of these are all things that it can be a little clunky to do via command line or web. Sometimes it's hard to know which place is which. This adds a lot of power right inside of Visual Studio Code to do all these different operations. So I like it a whole lot. We can also see, like, some people may not realize when you go to, when you've made some changes and you realize that you've forgotten to refresh for some reason, you can kind of set those changes aside into something called a stash, and this gives you visibility to your stashes. So if we made some crazy change to this file, and I'll go ahead and do that, mangle the heck out of this poor little file, we can stash that change away, and then we can see that, oh, well, you got to give it a message. Well, in this case, it's garbage, but that's fine. We can see that we've got that stash here, and we could reapply those changes to the repo after we've successfully finished our synchronization. So there's a lot of really nice powers in GitLens. I would encourage anyone working with source control to get familiar with GitLens. It gives you so much. A little bit more of a fluff piece for as far as what it adds to most people's worlds, but it can be kind of a nice to have, is also this little GitGraph extension. I think it's sort of fun when working with clients to have a visual. For example, this particular repo, I was the only one working on it, so it was one main branch, and it was to create the first version. So there's no separate branches or graphs at this point. This was to get me to version 1, straight line. But if you're working with multiple developers and you're working with multiple approvals for multiple requests, it can get pretty crazy. For example, if we take a look at one of the client environments, I can't show you the code, but this is an example of what happens when you have 6 different devs who might have 7 or 8 features each to work on. The branching feature strategy can get really interesting to control. And I think being able to display this visual complexity to project managers and maybe even to your clients gives a better understanding of, like, why is it a bad thing that we're not approving these changes quickly? It's because these all grow and grow and grow, and they become, you get a lot more different branches if you're using a feature-based branch development strategy. So GitGraph can be a nice way to visualize what's going on and how complicated is the project management making your development life. So that one's a fun one that I strongly recommend. Let me close that up here. And then we have in our next one up for bid, this one I know is used by a few different people that is very popular. It is the GitHuh Repositories functionality, and specifically this lets you browse a GitHub repo remotely. The number one usage that I know of that people love this for is to open up Stefan Maron's code history for BC itself, to be able to look at version by version all of the different things that people have changed in the base product. I am not going to bog down my machine right this very second, because that's a pretty big set of things to open up. But if we wanted to open remote repository, and let's say we'll open it up from GitHub, And it will ask you to sign in using GitHub, which that's unfortunate. I didn't particularly feel like doing that on camera. Copy, cancel that. Pardon for 1 second.
We will keep our eyes closed.
Yeah, not a problem. So if we open up the remote repository, this will pull from all of the ones that you have. So for example, I could open up my AL guidelines, the new repo for the Business Central Dev Patterns platform here, design patterns and best practices. So here we go. I'm now directly looking at the GitHub repo, and I have not had to clone that. So this can be a really nice way within your Visual Studio environment to quickly look at what's in some of the different platforms and places, and not have to clone everything, because maybe you're not going to be making changes, but you want to be able to see. Okay, well, I might have to give it a URL, but that's fine. You can open up some of the different places that you have access to and say, I want to just pop these different platforms open. And the real power to that with opening up with Stefan's repo for the base app is then you can go ahead and use the full search functionality of Visual Studio Code against that. And boy, is that really useful. This also can be a great way to find extensions and things like that. So I strongly recommend checking that out. Okay, great. So that's that series. And the next one up, I found it more useful when it first came to the market, so I may pull this one back, but folks may still find it useful, so I'm going to include it. The extension that I'm looking at next here is, let's get back to the installed list, thank you. I do wish sometimes it was search the installed first. Code time. This interacts with a platform called software.com. And what it does is it just keeps track of your programming metrics. It's really built, I think, a lot more for some of the tools out there like Slack and the other communities and things like that. And they do definitely funnel you towards a paid program. But the idea behind this one is that you can quickly see kind of your stats of how am I spending my time. So if I were to look at my dashboard for this, I can see, what are my stats for coding time. And no one panic, these hours are for this particular Visual Studio Code profile. So you can see, what are my stats today compared to last week? Am I getting enough active, uninterrupted code time? You can hook this up to Outlook and also have it therefore tell you, how are you doing metric-wise against meetings. So for those of you who are developers and you're going, I can't get anything done because of the amount of meetings you people have me in, you can screenshot these 2 times and say, see, it was 26 hours of meetings and 8 hours of coding about that. So it's pretty nice. Behind the premium wall, you can do some additional things like do organizational level tracking to see how your whole team is performing. You can do deeper analytics to see what projects that's against. So there's some really interesting integrations around that. And one of the things that it does support if you have the Outlook integration is in this bottom right-hand corner, you can hit this enter flow mode, and what it'll do is it'll create like a little timestamp on your calendar that says basically for the next half hour in a little while, next half hour to an hour, depending on your settings, I want to not be disturbed. So my calendar will show me as busy while I'm in flow. So that can be nice to have. Let's see here. And yes, there is absolutely some feedback of depending on how many extensions you've loaded up into your poor machine. you can see some performance issues. So be aware that depending on your system, that you may want to be judicious with which extensions are must-haves versus nice-to-haves. I definitely have seen that. A lot of the repos that I'm working with these days are a couple hundred objects or less, and that doesn't seem to cause a whole lot of problem. But I do have some 1,000+ object repos that you notice the performance difference. So yeah, you do want to pay attention to that. And the last one that I intended to cover today as part of things is a little one that I've used in a couple of public repos, and I'm not sure how much it will be of benefit to everyone, but it's a nice to be aware of, is this CodeTour extension. And the idea behind this is that you can guide people through a repo and explain the different steps of things. So this extension that we're looking at right here is a public repo that I've got out there in the world called Gift Basket. It's just a demonstration extension to teach lots of the different basics of what do you need to know about Business Central development and that sort of thing. And what CodeTour does is it adds this little option right down here at the bottom called CodeTour. Go figure. And the first time you open up a repo, it says, hey, there's a tour in this repository. Would you like to take it? And we can see that under this, I have 69 steps. And if we hit play, this will allow us to create some explanatory text about the overall tour. And in my case, I'm explaining the needs, the backstory, what did the person ask for, and each step by step, it keeps track of which ones that you've been through. And as you do next, it'll take you to the relevant file and the relevant line. So it can be a way to, even if it's just, 10 or 15 steps where you're explaining some of the core concepts of an extension, this can be something that teaches new people the specifics of that extension, or maybe even that client if you're doing per tenant extensions. This can be a way that you can easily guide people through what are some of the different things that they need to bear in mind as they work through this.
So Jeremy, each icon is a marker for one of those texts, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Exactly. So you can see in this file, we've got lots of little waypoints that we're going to stop by in our tour. This is going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And the nice thing about this is that it is just a tours folder here, and all of this is just a markdown set of files. When you want to create a new one, you can simply create a new tour, and you specify the name, and you can record, and you go to each of the lines, you write some descriptive text about it, and all of that is saved in this .tour file, which is just a JSON with Markdown, so that will be checked into your GitHub as well. So this can be a really good way to help onboard people to more complicated extensions. If there are some special organizational knowledge pieces that you want to share with new staff, make sure you never ever deploy this to this Docker box, or everything's even small, just heads up notices, because the first time they open this extension, it'll say, hey, there's a CodeTour, would you like to take it? So that can be very valuable. And that particular example, if we head off to GitHub, gift baskets. This one is a public repo because it was meant to be a teaching situation here. This little Patreon sample gift basket, you can go ahead and clone this, take the tour, and it gives people a guide through understanding tables and pages. So this was something that I was testing out to see how well does it help teach new people. All right. So I see a couple of questions, or at least feedback pieces.
Yeah, it's a feedback from Arend Jan, actually noting, and maybe you could react on that also, of course, in his experience, installing too many extensions slows down VS Code, especially when working with larger extensions. And as he writes, so recently I've uninstalled quite some of them that I only use occasionally. And of course you can activate or enable and disable your extensions depending on whether you do it for a workspace only or at the let's say user level. What is your experience with that?
Agreed wholeheartely. If you're working with the base app or really large extensions, you're going to probably need to, unfortunate thing of working with extensions, and you have to disable some extensions. So it's we use the same terms, and that makes it a little challenging. And unfortunately, so far, we haven't been able to persuade the Visual Studio Code team that we have the ability to have workspace level settings where we can recommend extensions. There isn't functionality, like here we can recommend it. There isn't functionality where we could disable or discourage specific extensions. So we can't do anything super special like, we know that this extension is so large that it'll have performance problems with X. So we go ahead and disable that. So yeah, we don't have that yet. I should clarify. Oh, did they add? I'm getting new info in the form of questions that you can disable extensions per workspace. I didn't know you could do that in the file, in the settings file. So I am going to nominate you to do a blog post on that, AJ.
Yeah. Well, I just mentioned it already. But it's possible, yeah. You can disable. I mean, if you go anywhere on that level, or if you go to your extension page to a specific extension and you click on disable, you have the option to indeed disable only for your workspace.
I see. But unfortunately, I believe that's saved in your local machine. It doesn't go into the repository to say that when a new person sets up this space that it should auto disable this. The Visual Studio Code team has pushed back on they don't want a different user experience based on the settings file. So yeah, so per person you can choose for this workspace. I would like, because maybe it's a giant, you're working with the base objects or something like that. AL Studio is fantastic, but maybe it causes a little bit of a slowdown. So when I'm working in the base app, I would disable it for that particular workspace. It won't do that for other people, but yeah. If there are extensions from this list that you start to make use of in your organization and you really want to encourage people to also make use of them, say, for example, like the CodeTour, it can make a whole lot of sense in the extensions file for the workspace here to create little recommendations sections. And these are just as simple as when we go to, let's say, for example, of CodeTour, if we click on that, this little item name in the URL, which is a smaller font, so apologies for everyone here, but up in the URL, just copy this item name, and that's what you would use as your string in your recommendations. So.
Okay, clear. Yeah.
And I am seeing there is some strong recommendation around one that I have not tried out yet called ErrorLens. So that sounds pretty cool to me. I'm all for that. It's making things easier to use. So that's a good thing. And yes, AJ, you are absolutely correct. You I know you use lots of these already. So it's good stuff. Great.
So nicely on time, Jeremy. apart from the feeding of the question window by Aaron Jan. Are there any other questions, fellows? Do you have some questions? Please type them in. We still have, let's say, a little bit more than 5 minutes left for this hour.
Okay.
Apparently not. There was one thing I was missing in your package, and I should beat you for that. Why is the ATDD test scripter not in your
I
your
know,
list?
right? That is, I agree. That should absolutely be. I probably spaced on that because I've had it installed for so long that I forget that it's not in my pack.
Yeah. Well, you know where it's from.
Absolutely. So I'll go update the AL pack to have this.
Yeah, not a question, but Rajesh says, thank you for the informative and quick tips, and I can only agree on that. I second that fully. So, Jeremy, I think you did indeed a very nice and very informative webinar. The fact that there are indeed not a lot of real questions makes clear that everything is sounding clear. Having shown us a couple of small additional things and somewhat bigger that we can use in VS Code is, I think, for everybody very worthwhile. If there are no questions, only compliments, nice presentation, etc., I think we're going to close down for today. Thanking you especially, Jeremy, and let me officially switch to this slide for anybody who wants to contact us. Feel free to use our email address. Tonight, I think the recording will already be on YouTube. So spread the word, be part of this. If you find a topic that might be of use for you, but maybe also for others, let us know. And surely if you want to be a speaker, tell me. So Jeremy, on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for this. And everybody, thank you for being here. I think we had a nice audience, a little bit around 48, 50 people. So that's quite a nice number, showing that there's a lot of interest in this. So we're going to close down for today. Everybody have a good evening or the remaining part of the day, or a good night, and we'll meet in 2 weeks' time when AJ will be here talking about OAuth and what about that at the moment and what are the alternatives. So thank you very much and see you next time. Bye for now.